Hello, Gospel Revolutionaries around the world. This is day 3 of the Global Calgary Grace Conference. Thanks for joining in with us again this afternoon. We have a special session, but I want to remind you that coming up tonight at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, join us on Zoom. You can find the link below this video or above the video, wherever the comment section may be. And join us tonight for a live interactive session with Michael Williams, myself, Beres, Bartlett, and other Gospel Revolutionaries. We hope that you'd come on, bring your questions, bring your comments. We'd love to hear you, and we'd love to spend some time with you this evening. But right now, I want to introduce to you Robert May, a longtime Gospel Revolutionary and supporter. He has got an exciting message for you. So would you welcome with me this afternoon, Robert May.
Hello everybody, my name is Bob May, and I want to thank Mike and Beres and Daniel for inviting me to speak. The reason they invited me was Daniel was impressed because I found a little piece of the puzzle, which was looking at the lake of fire as the brazen sea or the molten sea in the Old Testament. But what I wanted to talk about was allegory, and specifically an allegory that it's like the gift that keeps on giving. It's an allegory that I've looked into, probably started about 30 years ago or more, and it just more and more keeps opening up about it. And just recently I found some things that have really hit home, and I wanted to share it. But a little bit about allegory and parable. Basically the same thing. I like to use the word allegory because that's the way I was taught. Where I went to church many years ago, we looked into the allegorical nature of the Old Testament, and basically the rule of thumb with us was the Old Testament is allegory, the New Testament actually happened. The miracles, all those things happened. I see it a little differently now. I think the allegories in the Old Testament and Jesus' parables were literary. I believe that Jesus actually acted out the allegories in the New Testament. So he, when John was unsure about Jesus, he sent his disciples to ask Jesus if he was the one to come. And Jesus used the miracles of raising the dead, giving sight to the blind and hearing to the deaf, and making the lame walk. He said that, tell John that, and that was basically Jesus acting out the spiritual reason he was here, to open our eyes, to open our ears. And so he acted it out in the physical realm. I believe allegory is something that comes to us in the mental realm, our front brain. The reason for parable and allegory, in my opinion, is to tell a story that the person hearing the story won't get for a period of time. And that's part of why believing was not possible in the Old Testament, because the allegories were leading up to the cross and what would happen at the cross. They couldn't believe it, and they couldn't hear it because it hadn't happened yet. But Paul came on the scene, and this is the most important thing I've learned from the Gospel Revolution. And if you use this as kind of a pattern to hold everything up against, it's that when we see the word saved in the Bible, it can mean two things. And saved can be redemption, or saved can be salvation of the soul, or it's sinking into your mind what has happened to us. And you kind of hold that up against everything you're reading and trying to figure out. And the problem is a lot of people will see the word saved and they think I'm not going to hell. That was taken care of at the cross. So anyway, allegory is a story laid over truth. So the story behind the story is what we're supposed to be getting at. Jesus taught parable and allegory. He called it the mysteries. In the parable of the seed and the sower, he shows what each symbol means. The seed is the word of God. The field is the world. And he explains all the pieces to that. And he says, how can you understand all parables unless you understand this parable? And he said he was teaching them the mysteries. Well, the mysteries are allegory. I used to think, well, how can you know all parables unless you know this parable? I used to think, excuse me, that all of those symbols, if you had those symbols and their meanings, you could figure out all parables. But there's not enough symbols there that he illustrates. What he is showing them is, I'm showing you how allegory works. And this is how you figure out all parables. You're looking for the story behind the story. So, what I wanted to do today, and this is a big job, I'm going to try and condense it. I'm going to use a couple visual aids because symbols are the language of dreams. They're the language of our subconscious mind. We think in symbols. We think in pictures. So I just wanted to use a few of those just to show the allegory that I wanted to get across. And that's the story of, excuse me, Jacob and Joseph down in Egypt. Now, the overall of the story is, it starts at the cross. So yes, Joseph is a type of Christ, and he saves the world. But the story begins at the redemption. I want to show something here that we just recently heard spoken about in the Gospel Revolution podcast. The cross and the rainbow. Now the rainbow was a token of God, or a sign, to show that he would never destroy the earth by water again. The cross is a sign that he would never destroy mankind again. Okay, I'm gonna take that same idea, and this is a Hebrew letter here. It's called the Tav, and each one of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, they're a number, they're a symbol, and they're an idea. So, just like an allegory, the skin on this idea is called the Tav. It's a letter. But the meaning, each one of these letters is a noun. The meaning of Tav is cross, or mark, or signature. Okay, this is the modern day version of it. This is the ancient, would be in the Koine Greek, which Jesus and the apostles read, quoted from. But you see, the cross, or the X, I actually called a guy up that was an expert on ancient languages, and I had seen these, both the modern and the ancient viewpoint of that letter, and I just wanted to check it, and I said, is it actually a cross? And he said, it's two lines crossed. It can be an X or it can be a cross. He said, but you can't look at it that way because he had a different way of looking at it. I have the way of looking at it as God invented the alphabet, and especially the Hebrew alphabet, because the numbers are important. The idea behind it is important. Tav is a cross, Beth is a house. You remember Bethel, where Jacob said, surely God is in this place, and I knew it not, and he called it Bethel, house of God. Okay, so he said, no, it's not a cross. You can't take it that way. It can be an X. I said, well, that's even better, because it also means signature. And even today, we'll put an X and say, sign your name there. That's signature. All right, now in the book of Exodus, the angel of death passed over because the Israelites were told to put blood on the doorposts and on the lintel. That's the shape of the Tav cross, the doorposts and the lintel. And the angel of death would pass over. Okay, and then there was blood on the Calvary cross. Why? Because the angel of death would pass over. So we have a rainbow, a cross, a Tav cross from the first Passover. But I wanted to show you something else. The story of Joseph down in Egypt begins with the coat of many colors. Now, the brothers were jealous of Joseph, and when he got the coat of many colors, they were angry. And then he had a dream, two dreams actually, and one was the sun, moon, and stars, 11 stars bowing down to him. Now this really made him mad. So they were off feeding sheep. Joseph comes up and they said, here comes the dreamer. So what did they do? They threw him in a pit. They covered his coat of many colors, the rainbow, with blood. Brought that coat back to Jacob and said the animals tore him apart. So they sold him off to slavery in Egypt. And while they were deciding what to do with him, Judah comes up with the idea, hey, let's make a profit on this. We're going to sell him for 20 pieces of silver. Okay, that sounds an awful lot like what Judas did in the New Testament, but it was 30 pieces of silver. So the beginning of the story of Joseph down in Egypt is the cross. So everything from that point until the reunion of the brothers and Jacob down in Egypt, everything after between there is an allegory for Christ in us, the hope of glory. What does Joseph do down in Egypt? Well, he finds himself in weird situations. He gets sold to the captain of the guard. Later on, he goes to prison. Later on, he goes to the Pharaoh's house. But in each case, he's given control over everything. He's Potiphar, the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. He puts him in charge of his whole household. And later on, his wife comes on to Joseph and accuses him of attempted rape, basically, and he goes into the prison. He gets into the prison, the keeper of the prison puts him in charge of all the prisoners, puts him in charge of everything in the prison. Then he interprets some dreams, and later on, the Pharaoh hears about it. And the Pharaoh has dreams. And basically it was, Joseph gives the interpretation of the dream. He said, it's not in me, God shall interpret the dream. So it was 7 years of plenty and 7 years of basically starvation. So the Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge of everything, and the Pharaoh's only sitting on the throne, but Joseph basically owns Egypt. He decides where everything goes. So the reason the Pharaoh put him in charge was because he's saying, what do I do about these dreams? You know, he interprets it, Joseph interprets the dreams, and then he tells him, you put a good man in charge, and you lay up the corn in the good season, in the productive season, and then you divvy out the corn later. It's basically, he rationed all the corn in Egypt to save the world, basically, because by the end of that drought, famine, by the end of it, everybody was buying corn off him, which in those days it would have been wheat or barley or something, some kind of a grain, but they call it corn. And by the end of it, people sold themselves everything they had for the corn, their cattle, their land, everything. And then at the end of it, they ended up being basically sharecroppers, giving a fifth of everything back to the pharaohs. So at the end of it, Joseph says, to this day I have bought you. And it was not just Egypt, it was all the countries. But so while this famine was going on, Jacob and his family were starving, so he sent his sons down to Egypt to get corn from Joseph. Now when Joseph saw the sons, he basically hid who he was. And there's some going back and forth. He accuses them of being spies. He asks them about their background. They say, we have a father, we have a brother that died, we have a father back in Canaan, and a younger son. And he says, well, you're spies. So to prove you're not spies, go get the younger son and bring him to me. So this is all going to lead up to the reunion of the brothers and Jacob and Joseph. But what hits me is it goes back and forth with them traveling to Egypt and Joseph making demands on them. He wants to see Benjamin, his younger brother, and actually that's his full brother. They were both sons of Rachel. Now when Joseph was born, Rachel, as each one of the sons are born, the meaning of their name is spoken. Excuse me. Is spoken by the mother. So when Joseph was born, it says, Rachel said, God has taken away my reproach, and he shall add to me another son. Now, a lot of people, if you look up the word Joseph, it'll say adding to. I think the adding to is referring to Benjamin, because God has taken away my reproach would be redemption, and it would have to do with Joseph. But anyway, so adding to, let's go with that. So progressively increasing is also another way to look at that. Now Joseph down in Egypt would be Jesus inside of us, progressively increasing. That sounds a lot like salvation of the soul. Things come to us a little at a time, as this allegory came to me a little at a time over many years. And so Joseph, when he gets down to Egypt, the Pharaoh names him something else. It's Zaphnath Paneah. Okay, revealer of hidden things, or one who discovers hidden things, or savior of the world. These are the different meanings of that name. He's an interpreter of dreams. That's the subconscious. When we wake up, a lot of times in the morning, we'll have an idea come to our head. We even know this subconsciously because if you ask somebody to make a decision on something or you give them some information, they'll a lot of times say, let me sleep on that. So, which also is relates to the name of Benjamin, or it relates to his blessing in when Jacob blesses the sons. He says he's a ravening wolf, and in the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he'll divide the spoils, or apportion the spoils. So it's like a lot of times we'll get something from an allegory, and we'll think about it, but how do you apportion the spoils? A lot of it is, in my mind, is we have redemption, we have salvation of the soul, and that's how you apportion or divide the information that you're getting. At least with me, that seems to be a key. And speaking about dividing, it was Paul that said, rightly dividing the word of truth. He said, study to show thyself approved of God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So that's dividing. That's, you break something apart, you analyze it, but you have to have some guide to go by. And Paul is saying, you are approved of God. So when you study, when you look at these things, consider yourself already approved of God. That's how you rightly divide the word of truth. It divides at the cross. It divides at the beginning of the Joseph story, because that's the cross. Everything after that is salvation of the soul. Excuse me. So anyway, what started this was many years ago. A friend of mine and myself were discussing the parallels between Benjamin and Paul. Now, Paul was of the tribe of Benjamin, and he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He knew the scriptures inside and out. And when Jesus called him, he went to Arabia for 3 years. Now, how Jesus taught him, he taught him face to face in the physical, I'm not sure. But one thing is, when he came out, he said, these things are allegory. He was looking at the Old Testament through different eyes. They're stories. Mike has said many times, it's the story that's the main thing. Okay, so if you have an allegory of Sarah and Isaac and Hagar and Ishmael, and Paul is saying these are two mountains and these are the two covenants. Now, he was seeing something different than the story. He was seeing the story behind the story. So let's take Isaac. So if he was an allegory, then what is the son of an allegory? It would be more allegory. It's a longer story than we thought. So Jacob is an allegory, and his sons are allegory. Joseph is an allegory. Benjamin is an allegory. So what's the story behind the story? And to me, it's all this is leading up to the reunion. Joseph down in Egypt is Jesus inside of us, in our subconscious. He's the revealer of hidden things, the interpreter of dreams. He stores up the corn, lets it out a little at a time, Then when it comes to time for the reunion, he says, unless it all depends on two things, Benjamin and Jacob showing up. Now they finally talk Jacob into letting Benjamin come. And they do that by holding Simeon hearing hostage, or Joseph does that. He holds Simeon hostage. Now Benjamin, they go and get Benjamin finally and say, they're holding Simeon hostage. You got to send the kid. So this was like their second time to Egypt. So when Benjamin shows up, he sets Simeon free. Okay, when Paul showed up, hearing, which is Simeon, we were able to hear the gospel because he was the preacher. He had the gospel. So there's a hint there that Benjamin and Paul are related. One is a type of the other. Now, there's also something I'm not going to cover all this, but it's something that, think about it, let it roll around your head. But this, I call this the setup. When they were going back to get Jacob, Benjamin was already met Joseph. All the brothers were there, and Joseph basically sets them up. He hides his cup in Benjamin's sack, or has his steward do it. And then when they're on their way back to bring corn and get Jacob, the steward catches up to them and he says, somebody stole Joseph's cup that he drank from and divined with. Okay, that's the interpreter of dreams. He divines. And one of the brothers, Reuben, I think it was, he says, well, in whose sack you find the cup, let him be killed and make the rest of the brothers servants. And the steward says, okay, let it be according to your word. The one in whom sack we find the cup shall be the servant, and ye shall be blameless. Now this is interesting. How could they be blameless? I mean, they sold their brother into slavery. It's because of the cross. They are blameless. So anyway, they pull the cup out of Joseph's, or out of Benjamin's sack. So basically, Joseph was setting Benjamin up. Now Benjamin is his servant. Okay, I want to read something from Paul. From Colossians 1:24 to 1:30. He says, to fill up that which was behind in the afflictions of Christ, where I am made a minister according to the dispensation of God, which is given to me to fulfill the word of God. Okay, Paul is to fill up that. Jesus came to redeem us. Paul took on the afflictions of Christ. He came to bring the knowledge of salvation to us. So he was set up, just like Benjamin was set up. Now, you might think I'm stretching it a little bit, putting Benjamin and Paul together. But think about it. Paul described himself as a Pharisee of Pharisees of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. And also, he was the 13th apostle. Born out of due time, he says. And he never met Jesus until after the cross. So, in other words, Paul thought Jesus was dead until he appeared to him on the road to Damascus. Benjamin went his whole life thinking Joseph was dead until he reveals himself at the reunion. And he was Joseph's only full brother of all the brothers. He was Joseph was the oldest from Rachel, and Benjamin was the youngest, but there was only 2 sons from Rachel. Okay, so Paul says he's the minister. He is made a minister to the dispensation of God, which is given to me to fulfill the word of God, even the mystery. Now remember, Jesus called allegory mystery. Even the mystery which had been hid from the ages, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Now, that's what this story is about. It's about Christ in us. It's not about the cross. It starts at the cross, but the whole story to the reunion. Here's another thing. I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but there's so much to this, and it's like a tapestry that you pull one thread over here and it unravels over here and something else unravels over here. But the sons of thunder, they came up to Jesus with their mother, and she asked it in the resurrection Jesus would put her sons, James and John, that they would drink from the cup that he drank from, and to sit on his right and left hand side. And Jesus said, you shall indeed drink from the cup, which I believe is a cup of suffering, which all the apostles had to go through. But to sit on my right and left hand side is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it is prepared of my Father. This is Benjamin in the cup. I believe Paul, because of the importance of him preaching the true gospel, was prophesied in the book of Genesis, the type of Benjamin. Now, Benjamin's name, his mother, when he was born, his mother named him son of my sorrow because she was dying. But Jacob named him the son of the right hand. So who's going to sit on Jesus' left and right hand but him that was prepared, to whom it was prepared of my Father? Them to whom it is prepared of my Father. Now, Paul was not an afterthought. Paul was not plan B. Just like God was not surprised by the fall, God was not surprised by the apostles mixing the law and grace in the gospel. So this shows that Paul was planned for beforehand, or prepared of my Father, as Jesus puts it. So the story ends at the reunion. The 2 elements necessary were Jacob had to show up, Benjamin had to show up. Now, Benjamin, I believe, is showing grace, because when Joseph finally meets him, he falls on his neck and kisses him and says, God be gracious to you, my son. And then he gives him 5 times the messes of his brothers, and he clothes him with 5 raiments of clothes, and 5 is the number of grace. You could look that up. There's a lot of references to that. But Jacob still had not come down yet. And Jacob is funny. He's got two names, Jacob and Israel. And if you look at his life, Jacob means seeking after God. And there are times when Jacob has spiritual experiences beyond the normal, and his name will change to Israel. And then it will change back to Jacob. And then it will change to Israel when he has another spiritual experience. Then it will change back to Jacob. And I wanted to find this, but it's interesting when they finally talk. I'll do it by memory because I can't find it here. But when they finally talk Jacob into coming down to Egypt, and they do this by, he sent wagons for all the Israelites and food for the journey. But the words that Joseph said was, that changed Jacob's mind, is tell him that Joseph, your son, is alive, and that he's in charge of all of Egypt, and that you shall dwell in the land of Goshen if you come back. So, and it says Jacob, his heart failed him. He didn't believe it. But when they told him the words of Joseph, he said, it says Jacob, his heart failed him, and he couldn't believe. And then it says, and the spirit of Jacob revived, and Israel said, my son is yet alive. I will go and see him once more before I die. So Israel is the spirit of Jacob. Jacob is the soul. Jacob's just a guy. He's seeking after God. But the spirit of Jacob revived, and Israel said. You hear that? The spirit of Jacob revived, and Israel said, my son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. So Jacob, Benjamin, all the other sons, and Joseph are together. Now, there's a thing in the Hebrew, like I said, the letters add up to, the letters are numbers. It's their numbering system. And there's a thought that if a word adds up to the same amount as another word, it has the same meaning or a similar meaning. So where they were going to dwell is Goshen. That's where Jacob came. It's a place in Egypt. It's a land in Egypt. Now the word one in the Hebrew is Ahad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord that God is one. It's Ahad. It's if you add the letters up to the word Ahad, one, it's 13. So 13 is unity. It's one. Now the land of Goshen, if you add those letters up, it's 13. Now Joseph had the dream at the beginning that started all this, the brothers throwing him in a pit. And in the dream, there was the sun and the moon and 11 stars and Joseph. Okay, so they were bowing down to him in the dream. So the sun and the moon would be Jacob and Rachel, and the 11 stars would be his brothers, because there's 12 brothers, him included. That would be 14. Except Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. So what we have is his dream, when it came true, it was 13 instead of 14. Again, the idea of union, one. And anyway, that we are one with God, that Jacob came to realize that Joseph was alive, that Benjamin came to realize that Joseph was alive, all add up to the same thing. We are one. Anyway, there's a lot more here. I'm not good at speaking in front of a camera, but I would suggest you read the story. It's Genesis 30, I believe it's 37 to 45. But this parable, or this allegory, is the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, Genesis 37 to 45. Anyway, again, I thank you for inviting me, and I hope I've given you all something to think about. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the gift that keeps on giving, because there's so much hidden in this allegory. And it's all about us after the cross. It's how it works. It's how we start to realize it's Christ in us, the hope of glory. Because when the brothers finally figured out who Joseph was, and he said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And they were blameless. It also says that this guy will be my servant and you will be blameless. That's the gospel. We are blameless because of the resurrection. But Jacob finally coming to the conclusion that Joseph was alive, that's what it was all resting on. That's our conscious brain realizing that Jesus is alive and he lives in us. Christ in us, the hope of glory, which was the mystery that Paul was showing us. All right. Thanks, Gospel Revolutionaries. Hope you have a great day. Bye.
Hi, this is Don Bartlett from the Gospel Revolution, and I'm here today simply to ask you to consider that if you have added value from what you've heard today, if you've received anything from what you've heard today, I want to ask you to consider actually putting some of that value back. This is, above everything else, a value for value model. We charge for nothing. We have maybe 20,000 hours of audio, video, podcasts up on the web on www.gospelrevolution.com, and you can get all of that for free. Jesus said, freely you've received, freely give. And I want to ask you today, would you consider, if you've received value from this, if you believe that Mike Williams Ministries has fed into you at all, would you consider perhaps feeding back into Mike Williams Ministries? That helps us get this gospel of grace and peace out all around the world. Thank you for considering us.